When it comes to Hollywood, there's nothing new under the sun. Everything in Hollywood has ties dating back to occultism, mysticism, ancient old Enochian magic. Nothing new in Hollywood is original or groundbreaking, mind-blowing. It's all been done before, just stories retold or rediscovered and spun in a new light. Case in point, Star Wars. George Lucas, that whole series of films. When we were little, we all couldn't believe the imagination this man had and thought everything that he put on pen to paper was from his own thoughts. But as we grow older, we know different. George Lucas has been privy to a lot of old information, stories, references, teachings, all that good sort. Mainly in point, the return of the Jedi. The Jedi has existed, and I'll get into that in a minute. But I'll just give a rough reference point. The stormtroopers. The stormtroopers in the Star Wars movies that can never hit a moving target or a standing target. Well, we all know that George Lucas got the inspiration from the Nazi SS troopers. But that's child's play. What we're going to do is get into some high science. And in the words of the immortal KRS-One, we're going to break this down to its very last compound. Now, those that grew up coveting the powers of the Jedi will be pleased to learn that the Masters of the Force did indeed exist at some point in time. Records of them survive certain countries such as Egypt and Persia, where they were magician priests and guardians of the powerful priest, similar to the Emperor of Star Wars. In ancient Egypt, surviving histories reveal that the Jedi manifested as the Djedi, D-J-E-D-I, hence the name Jedi, which was a sect of the priesthood and masters of the force that protected the pharaoh. And in Persia, they were the Narts, guardians of a holy grail called the Nartmung, and the protectors of enlightened priest kings who lived at least 1,000 years before King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table. Two early sects of Jedi Knights were first introduced to the West by the Knights Templar, who upon returning from the Middle East in the 13th and 14th centuries distilled Jedi histories learned from the Sufis into a series of lengthy Holy Grail legends. The Templars synthesized the powerful emperors and priest kings of the past into enigmatic figures of the Fisher King, the resident of a Grail castle and the owner of various manifestations of the Holy Grail. His well-being and safekeeping of his castle's Holy Grail relics was given over to an order of Knights of the Grail, who were a distillation of the early Jedi Knights from Egypt and Persia. This truth was boldly and authoritatively proclaimed in the Parazevel by Knight Wolfram von Eschenbach, whom he specifically referred to the Fisher King's Holy Grail Knights as Templars, Parzival, as well as other historical references put forth in the Middle Ages regarding the Templars imply that the Knights had inherited wisdom of the Force that had been passed down to them almost directly from their ancient antecedent Jedi Knights. The formation of the Knights Templar in roughly 1118 CE could be historically entitled The Return of the Jedi. In recorded history, the secrets of the Force of the Jedi Knights were first taught among the Egyptian Jedi, who may have received them from a much earlier prehistorical Jedi Knight order, perhaps one from Atlantis. One Jedi priest mentioned in the Egyptians' Westcar papyrus is said to have possessed the key that opened the secret chambers of the sanctuary of Thoth, who many esoteric historians believe he was a missionary and master of the Force from Atlantis. Within the sanctuary were books authored by Thoth that covered in detail the physics behind activating and developing the Force through alchemy, the art that Thoth Hermes would eventually become the recognized patron of throughout the world. Through Thoth's alchemy, the esoteric symbol of which is the caduceus, a future Jedi could awaken the normally dormant serpent power, the fiery force at the base of the spine, and then move it up towards his head, where it would culminate in supernatural powers and intuitive Gnostic wisdom. The proof that a Jedi had accomplished this alchemy is intrinsic to his name, which was essentially an honorific title. The Djed of Jedi denoted column, while the root word of the sound DJ denoted serpent. Thus, a Jedi was one who had awakened the DJ or serpent at its seat, and then raised it up on its head, his or her head, her Djed column or spine to the head. Those Jedi that succeeded in this inner ascension could potentially become immortal, which is yet another meaning of Jedi. As the serpent force rises up the spine, its alchemical fire of transformation moves within every cell of its body and raises the frequency of human flesh to that of immortal, pure energy. Because of the spine's association with immortality, the Djed column or pillar became the Egyptians' symbol of immortality, and they traditionally covered their mummies in sarcophagi with symbolic Djed images in hopes of achieving immortal life here in the after. Through raising the inner serpent power, the Jedi acquired an abundance of force, which could be used to perform supernatural feats similar to those associated with Lucas's Jedi. For example, the Jedi of the Westcar Papyrus, who possessed the key to the secrets of the Chambers of Thoth, was said to have acquired the power to reattach the severed heads of animals at will. Other Jedi are mentioned in Egyptian history as traversing the scorching Egyptian sands with only their magical staffs, and or becoming powerful magicians in the service of the pharaohs. Some Jedi are found in the service of the pharaoh that Moses and Aaron confronted in order to demand freedom for the Hebrews. At the pharaoh's command, his Jedi magicians turned their staffs into live serpents, which represented the serpent power that each Jedi possessed. But Aaron's staff also turned into a snake, albeit a much larger snake than those of the Jedi, and it proceeded to consume their smaller serpents, thus proving the superiority of his serpent powers to theirs. The wisdom of the Jedi that the Knights Templar learned about may have first entered the Middle East, as far as the Exodus since Mateo tells us that the Hebrew leader Moses had been initiated into all the secrets of Egypt's priesthoods during his formative years in the country. The wisdom of the Jedi may have also arrived many years later, when the Dal Nun al-Misri traveled from Egypt to the Middle East after spending many years studying the alchemical hieroglyphs covering the temples and obelisks of Egypt. With the esoteric wisdom he discovered, Dal Nun al-Misri founded the Al-Banna, the Sufi sect of Freemasons. According to the Sufi Idris Shah, the Al-Banna were teachers of the Templars during the years the Knights resided in the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Temple Mount. Much of the wisdom of alchemy and the force that resulted in the Templar Al-Banna intercourse was later taken into the continent of Europe by Templars who assimilated it into fledgling speculative Freemasonry. The Order of Jedi Knights, known by the Templars, was of the Order of the Knights, masters of the force of the ancient Persian Empire, possibly as old or older than the Jedi of Egypt. The Narts may have existed as early as King Jamshid, one of the incipient Persian kings of legend who ruled during the time of Aryan Vahaji, the Persian Golden Age, that some historians have placed as early as 20,000 BCE. Jamshid was a classic example of the Fisher King of Grail legend in that he suffered a fall from pride and lost his force, or far, as it was called in Persia, although he had previously adhered to a righteous path and had been a renowned master of the force. Jamshid endangered a lineage of far-empowered priests that culminated in the highly spiritual Kangani dynasty founded by King Ki Khosrow, the Persian King Arthur. Persian records state that, like King Arthur, Ki Khosrow possessed the Knights, or the Narts, who were associated with a holy grail of the Nartmong, and conducted their meetings around a similar table, similar to Arthur's Round Table. The mystical legends of Ki Khosrow and his Narts were eventually compiled into the Nart sagas during the later Persian Empire and have been regarded as Persian counterparts to Europe's Holy Grail legends. Let's see. What little we know today of the Persian arts suggests that these Neo-Jedi Knights were continually seeking to increase their force in order to become warrior adepts with a high level of spiritual purity and enlightenment. Only those with dedication to the king and country were immaculate could hope to increase their far to the degree needed in order to drink from the Nartmung when it is passed around the Persian round table. Certain nards increased their far to such a degree that they became the obvious choice to succeed an outgoing king. Some, like King Ki Losrap of the Khayanid dynasty, became endowed with a mystical temperament and an abundance of Gnostic insight. The Jedi secrets of the Force possessed by the early Persian kings and their nards were preserved within Persian civilization as popular legends for many hundreds of years. Then in the 11th century, the founder of the Order of Assassins, that was to become a huge influence on the Knights Templars, revived the ancient Nard tradition. He resurrected the secrets of the Force and founded a cadre of knights to serve him. Hassan chose for his court the castle of Alamut, the Eagle's Nest, which was located high in the Alborz Mountains, the region of northern Persia that had been anciently the seat of Persian kings. Hassan learned the secrets of the Force by studying the Nard legends and by traveling to Cairo in his younger years for the purpose of mastering 9 mystical degrees of a Sufi mystery school centered within the city. After his graduation, Hassan left Egypt and returned home quickly to establish himself as one of the greatest alchemists that Persia has ever seen. He subsequently founded his own mystery school of 9 degrees, which eventually became known as the Order of the Assassins. The degrees of alchemical purification of Hassan's school, which Hassan cryptically referred to as the 9 steps of ascension up the mystical mountain of Kaf, assisted by his assassin knights in awakening the inner force and acquiring Gnosis. Hassan's manual for his mystery school, the Sargazast-e Na, provided a step-by-step guide to the alchemical practices that would lead an aspiring knight to the summit of Kaf. Through their encounters with Sinan and his knights, the Templars, who had nearby castles in Syria, learned of some of the assassins' secrets of the Force. The Templars felt an affinity with the assassins since they were both renegade orders of knights aspiring to alchemy and Gnosis while being ostensibly members of a fundamentalist religion. Sinan, who the Templars came to call the Old Man of the Mountains, awed the knights with his powers, and they coveted his alchemy, which they eventually learned from both him and his knights, as well as various forms of Sufi sects. As a complement to what would eventually become the prodigious amount of Sufi teaching they acquired, the Knights Templar also inherited the Gnostic teachings of the Johannite Gnostic Church, which had been passed down them from a series of Grand Masters, beginning with John the Baptist. Interesting. Well, the Templar secrets of the Force eventually passed into some of the secret societies of Europe, including the Rosicrucians and Freemasons, and for a while this wisdom survived in its purity, but it would eventually become grossly distorted, hidden, or completely forgotten, and the era of the Jedi Knights would come to a grinding halt. But now, certain Templar organizations are making a concerted effort to resurrect the Jedi Knight Order wisdom of Egypt, Persia, and the early Templars. Let's see what else we have. The word wizard comes from those who held the staff of power, which was called the Wasar. Osiris was the life force within creation. His backbone, the Djed or Jedi, hence the force of the Jedi Knights of Star Wars, Osiris was called Asur, or as well as Wasser. The Wasser staffs were electrical conductors of power, hence the wizards were Wassers or Osirises, using Wasser wands for their hexes. The main tenet of the Star Wars universe is completion of the circle, or finding the balance between good and evil. It is a metaphor for knowing whether you are on the wrong side or whether you are becoming destructive. The purpose of the ritual was to preserve order and repel chaos. In order to do this, first had to be an effort to raise this awareness, or Djed. Those that did this were known as Jedi. Our typical symbols such as the circle, the spiral, trees, and a pillar or pole were magically and ritually employed to preserve essential order. These symbols all have a connection to the sun and the worship of the sun. Historically, the Djed was raised at crucial transitional times between cycles, evoking light and stability to dispel darkness and disorder. Such periods were the winter solstices, the failing years of a reigning monarch, or the coronation of a new one. A tower or obelisk that is symbolic of the connection and the balance of all things in heaven and in earth now represents the Djed. Let's see. Originally, the Djed represented Neger Ptah, who was called Noble Djed, but later on it came to represent the Neger Asir. Djed pillars were painted along the bottom of the coffin to symbolize becoming Asar and the afterlife and associating the deceased with the royal house of Kem or Kemet. The Djedi come forth during the changing of the cycles, sun cycle, moon cycle, etc. It means to stabilize a chaotic planet and set everything to order before the coming or with the coming of the new age. As the celestial Asir resurrects, so must the physical Djedi. The Djedi were the stable ones, wisdom keepers of one mind and one spirit who, as initiates of the Osirian mysteries, comprised the living terrestrial body of the archetypical celestial Osiris. Contemporary Djedi are self-selecting regenerators of cosmos. They are those who, regardless of race or creed, are awakening to mission in service to the planet and the epochal imperatives of stability, continuity, and regeneration. There are 7 planes of existence, the lowest being the physical plane, the plane of the material, superficial world, a world in which most of us find ourselves trapped, unable to transcend carnal desires. The 7 planes are associated with the 7 chakras, located in the body from the torso to the top of the dome or the head. These are vital centers where electromagnetic waves resonate throughout the upper portions of the body. The 6th chakra is the third eye, which is located between the eyebrows. The headgear of the pharaoh is a serpent or snake, which is lined in perfect accord with the third eye. The reason being is because the snake represents an electromagnetic energy flow that resonates in the brain at the third eye level. In other words, a snake travels in a zigzag motion, which is equivalent to the way energy waves travel throughout the 7 chakras of the body. The mythical or symbolic meanings associated with the Djed since ancient Egyptian times were those of strength and stability. They represented the backbone of Osiris. Now we all know that without a functioning, healthy, and intact backbone, the human body is crippled or affected to varying degrees. Take out the backbone and the bones attached to it, and you are left with an inert mass of skin and muscle incapable of movement like an old coat to a falling floor. The Djed, or versions of it among indigenous populations around the world, is mentioned in legend and myth as a pillar or series of pillars holding up the sky or the world. Take a little thought further into the spiritual realm, and the phrase raising the Djed is synonymous of raising consciousness or raising awareness. The Djedi warriors are champions of the downtrodden, the underdog, the deprived, and most of all, champions of women and the divine, feminine, imprisoned in women throughout the world. The Djedi warriors are those raising awareness, raising consciousness, stirring the rest of us up to stand up for what is right and good in the world, to stand against oppression and tyranny. They are raising the Djed. The Djedi have also come to define a man or woman whose wisdom grants them stability through the power of righteous speech. There is the possibility of the true nature of the Skywalker in all of us. We each have the possibility to be a Jedi by maintaining contact with the Force or higher powers. This means positive and negative were brought together in harmony, each playing its proper role, just as night submits to the light of day. But keep in mind that in the teachings, the Djed as physical pillars symbolize the 2 currents based in the spinal column. The duality in this column, or not harmonizing these 2 currents, is the cause of our terrestrial continuity, successive reincarnations, or reoccurrences. Also, the phrase, "May the Force be with you," is actually a prayerful reminder for us to not only to remember and sustain our connection with the Force or higher powers, but also a reminder to attain to the presence. Or as Christ had said, "Watch and sleep not," or as Buddha has said, "Don't identify." All right, well, that's my little vid on the Jedi. I hope you guys learned something from it. All right, enjoy.